How do we know the Gospels are early, authentic accounts of Jesus' life and teaching? Well, let's break it down. By the early 2nd century, Christians are already quoting and circulating the Gospels. That alone shows that they weren't late legendary inventions. They were seen as authoritative from the start. And then there's Luke. He says he investigated everything and spoke with eyewitnesses. His sequel, Acts, ends around 62 AD, with Paul under house arrest. No mention of his death or the destruction of the temple in 70, suggesting it was written before either event took place. Now, since Acts is volume 2, Luke's gospel came even earlier. And if scholars are correct that he used Mark as a source, well then the Gospel of Mark is earlier still, placing us just decades from Jesus' death. Now that's incredibly close for ancient biography, but here's what people often miss. The Gospels don't just tell us about Jesus, they sound like him. They're marked by Semitisms, traces of Hebrew and Aramaic woven into the Greek, loanwords, idioms, and speech patterns that echo the world of 1st century rabbis. And that has huge implications. It's not just evidence of authenticity, it's a call to read him in his native context, with eyes wide open to the Jewish world that shaped his words. We've already seen how the Gospels reflect the voice of a 1st century rabbi, rooted in Hebrew scripture and rabbinic tradition. That's exactly what we explored in part 1 with what I called the reference gap. How missing the deep ties to the Hebrew Bible can lead us to misread Jesus, especially in the Sermon on the Mount. In part 2, we turned to the rabbinic gap and how early rabbinic literature can shed light on Jesus' teaching. We compared his words with those of other rabbis, looking at style, sayings, and now in this final episode, speech. So in this final part, we'll take a closer look at how the gospel writers preserved Semitic words and Hebrew expressions, the way rabbis actually spoke. By the end of this video, you'll see that this kind of rabbinic language isn't just background detail or linguistic trivia. It's the key to understanding what Jesus really meant. The Gospels were written in Common Greek. This was the lingua franca of the 1st century Mediterranean world. So anytime a Hebrew or Aramaic word appears, it would have stood out to readers. Take Matthew 5:22, for example. It would have looked something like this. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Reka, is liable to the court. And whoever says fool will be liable to the Gehinnom of fire. Are Reka and Gehinnom English words? Not at all. They weren't Greek either. What do they mean? Well, notice Matthew doesn't provide any explanation. His audience was likely familiar with such terms, whereas we are not. Sure, we could guess from the context, but if we want a clear answer, we need to look beyond the Bible. Like this story from the Talmud, where it is used as an insult, meaning empty-headed idiot or good for nothing. Gehinnom, or its Greek form Gehenna, that we see in Matthew, is used by Jesus more frequently. The term combines 2 Hebrew words, meaning ravine of Hinnom, mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. While this was a real location in Jerusalem, both Jesus and the rabbis repurpose it as a powerful image of the afterlife, a place where the wicked face judgment. This is evident in passages like this one from the Mishnah, which contrasts the fates of the righteous and the wicked. The disciples of Abraham, that is, those who follow after Abraham, inherit the world to come, whereas the disciples of Balaam, the wicked, inherit Gehinnom and descend into the pit of destruction. There's much we could say about Gehinnom and the afterlife, but for the purposes of this video, I just want to highlight that this is yet another word unique to Judaism. Both Jesus and the rabbis share the same language and concept. Let's look at one more. If we turn to the next chapter, we encounter yet another foreign word. Jesus says, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and Mammon." What in the world is Mammon? Ask the average person on the street, even most Christians, and they'd probably struggle to define it. Most people wouldn't have a clue. The crazy thing is, let's say you were to ask a Jewish student at a yeshiva, you might get the right answer. That's because the word appears in a well-known saying from Mishnah Avot. Let the mammon of your fellow be as precious to you as your own. Mammon in Hebrew, like the Aramaic mammonah, refers to money or property. In this case, the meaning is simple. Value your neighbor's money or possessions as you would your own. It's like a golden rule. In our verse from Matthew, Jesus warns against the temptation to let mammon become your master. After all, it's easy for our possessions to start possessing us. Speaking of possession, as early as the 4th century, theologians like Gregory of Nyssa suggested that Mammon was another name for Satan or demon of greed, an idea that grew in the Middle Ages. It's a good example of how a little embellishment can blur the original meaning. Jesus is simply saying, you cannot worship both wealth and God. Take your pick. The word Mammon also appears in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but for much of Christian history, the only way to know its meaning was to consult rabbinic writings or ask a Jewish person. The presence of Hebrew Aramaic terms like this in the Gospels is significant. It reminds us that we're reading an authentic Jewish sermon. And Matthew's choice to include these words says something about his audience. They likely understood what these words meant. So today, with most Christians being far removed from Judaism, well, that's not the case. Even so, I wish modern translations would preserve these words in the text as Matthew intended. Provide explanations in the margins. Let's not just remove them and pretend they were never there. Another area of speech we need to explore is the use of Hebrew expressions. Unique phrases with specific meanings like idioms that can be tricky to recognize and translate. And there's a perfect example right here in the same passage. Immediately preceding our Mammon verse, we find an elusive metaphor that has puzzled Christians for millennia. Jesus says, "The lamp of the body is the eye. If then your eye is good, your whole body will be illuminated. But if your eye is evil, your whole body will be darkened. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness?" Okay, some basic observations. The eye is likened to a lamp capable of illuminating the entire body. It's a small organ, yet it has a profound impact. Having the right kind of eye is critical, but what does the eye represent? Is it the right kind of focus, understanding, transparency, integrity? It's ambiguous, which is why we have varying opinions from commentators going back to the church fathers. We know having a good eye matters, but the meaning eludes us. This is where we need to step back and ask, was Jesus speaking as a Christian preacher or a Jewish rabbi? If the latter, does rabbinic literature offer any clues? Well, let's revisit the passage contrasting the righteous and the wicked. Whoever possesses these three things, he is of the disciples of Abraham. Now, what are they? A good eye, a humble spirit, and a moderate appetite. Notice the first of the three traits associated with the righteous, a good eye, ein tovah. This is something virtuous and highly valued in rabbinic thought. Conversely, the wicked are marked by an evil eye, ein ra'ah. Now, these are common Hebrew idioms, and pretty ancient ones too. If you know Hebrew, their meaning is readily understood. Think about it this way. If you speak English, which you probably do if you're watching this, you instantly understand phrases like turn a blind eye or see eye to eye. In Hebrew, having a good eye signifies generosity. By contrast, an evil eye refers to stinginess, selfishness, or envy. With this background, we can better understand our metaphor in Matthew. Jesus is saying that if your eye is good, meaning you're a generous person and attentive to others' needs, your whole being will be radiant. But if your eye is evil, if you're selfish, your life will be consumed by darkness. Now we have a coherent message that fits the surrounding context of wealth. The metaphor clarifies how one stores up treasure above, that's what he just talked about, and how one serves God over Mammon. It's a challenge to reorient our lives away from materialism and toward what matters, to value giving over greed. And that's an important lesson for today, a lesson often lost in the culture gap. So what other Hebrew expressions are present here in the sermon that deserve mention? Well, we could talk about the familiar phrase in the Lord's Prayer, "Forgive us our debts," a rabbinic way of referring to sin. Or take Matthew 5:17, where Jesus says he came not to abolish the Torah or the prophets, but to fulfill them. A common interpretation is that Jesus fulfilled the law by completing it, like a company fulfilling an order, so that his followers no longer need to. But that flips the meaning on its head. We can't just grab the word fulfill and make it mean whatever we want. In this context, fulfill and abolish are two terms that must be taken together. As many scholars have noted, Jesus is using rabbinic language, the same kind that we find in Mishnah Avot. Here, Rabbi Jonathan is contrasting one who fulfills the Torah with one who abolishes the Torah. There are many passages we could cite, but just to give a quick overview, to abolish the Torah meant to misinterpret or break it, while to fulfill meant to rightly interpret and uphold it. And the immediate context makes it clear that Jesus is employing the same rabbinic language. Let's end with a key Hebrew expression that runs through Matthew's gospel, the kingdom of heaven. Returning to where we began the Beatitudes, Jesus opens the sermon with, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." We've already unpacked the first half, but let's focus on what makes this phrase, "for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," stand out. Take a look at verse 10. What is the relationship between this verse and verse 3? For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's the only reward that's repeated. Now that's not coincidence. It forms an inclusio, bookending the Beatitudes and highlighting the central theme, the kingdom of heaven, as the ultimate reward for those who embody this way of life. But what does kingdom of heaven actually mean? Many assume it refers to heaven, the spiritual realm where God resides. And through that lens, it can sound like Jesus is pointing us away from the physical world. But is that really the case? Not at all. You see, in Judaism, heaven isn't just a place. Heaven was often a reverent substitute for God. Rather than say God's name directly, people would use euphemisms like heaven instead. We see this clearly in the parable of the prodigal son, where the son says, "I have sinned against heaven and before you." He means God. So when Matthew says kingdom of heaven, it's functionally the same as kingdom of God. In fact, Matthew 19 uses both phrases interchangeably. What's rarely taught is that kingdom of heaven is a rabbinic expression. You won't find it in the Hebrew Bible, the Apocrypha, the Dead Sea Scrolls, or other Second Temple Jewish writings. It only appears in two places, the Gospel of Matthew and rabbinic literature. Let me repeat that. Outside Matthew, the only place this phrase appears is rabbinic writings. They're speaking the same language. In Jewish teaching, the kingdom of heaven, Malchut Shemaim, refers to God's rule over the world, especially in the messianic future when peace and justice will prevail. But until then, it serves as a call to submit to God's reign here and now. The rabbis taught that before one fulfills the commandments, or even tries to, one must first accept the yoke of the kingdom of heaven to recognize God's authority. For most of church history, Christians have misread what Jesus meant by this important phrase. Far from describing a gated community in the clouds, the kingdom of heaven refers to God's reign over the world, both present and future. That's a significant shift in understanding. So next time you pray, "Your kingdom come, your will be done," may those words resonate even more deeply, not solely in hope for the afterlife, but as a call to live under God's reign here and now. We've covered a lot, looking at practical ways to better understand Jesus' teaching in context. Through the Sermon on the Mount, we've seen how familiarity with the Hebrew Bible and rabbinic literature can bring clarity to his words. We explored his teaching style, his sayings, and the many Semitisms preserved in the text. Now let's be clear. The similarities between Jesus and the rabbis do not prove that one influenced the other. They simply grew out of the same Jewish world of the Second Temple period. If this is your first time encountering this perspective, it might feel like a paradigm shift. You might be asking, why haven't I heard this before? And it's a question many ask because this view can be both exciting and uncomfortable because it challenges long-held assumptions about Jesus and his message. Sometimes the problem is methodological. Some scholars dismiss rabbinic sources like the Mishnah simply because they were written down after the Gospels. But that overlooks the importance of oral tradition in early Judaism. These traditions preserve teachings from the time of Jesus or even earlier. Commentators regularly draw from Second Temple sources like Josephus, Philo of Alexandria, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and other intertestamental writings to shed light on the world of the Gospels. There are some striking parallels in books like Ben Sira and Tobit, such as the concept of storing up treasure above, which Jesus echoes in his own teaching. But to dismiss rabbinic literature simply because it was written at a later time is a serious mistake. I'm not saying that we should accept everything rabbinic uncritically, but let's be honest. The tendency to dismiss these sources often reflects, in my own opinion, a deep desire to keep Jesus and Judaism separate and incompatible. Today, there's a growing hunger for something deeper, something more authentic. Many are looking back to ancient traditions and church history in hopes of reconnecting with the roots of the Christian faith. And while these traditions can offer valuable insight into how Christian practice developed, they don't necessarily bring us closer to Jesus himself. To truly understand his message, we have to step into his world, his culture, his context, rather than shaping him to fit ours. Because at the end of the day, we don't need flashy Bible packaging to make Jesus relevant. We just need to read him right. And trust me, when we do, we'll discover he's been relevant all along.